This is Professional Man by David Goodis. At 5:05, the elevator operated by Freddie Lamb came to a stop on the street floor. Freddie smiled courteously to the departing passengers. As he said goodnight to the office-weary faces of secretaries and bookkeepers and executives, his voice was soothing and cool-sweet. It was like a caress for the women, a pat on the shoulder for the men. People were very fond of Freddie. It was always so pleasant, so polite and quietly cheerful. Of the 5 elevator men in the Chambers Trust building, Freddie Lamb was the favorite. His appearance blended with his voice and manner. He was neat and clean, and his hair was nicely trimmed. He had light brown hair parted on the side and brushed flat across his head. His eyes were the same color, focused level when he addressed you, but never too intent, never probing. He looked at you as though he liked and trusted you, no matter who you were. When you looked at him, you felt mildly stimulated. He seemed much younger than his 33 years. There were no lines on his face, no sign of worry or sluggishness or dissipation. The trait that made him an ideal elevator man was the fact that he never asked questions and never talked about himself. At 5:20, Freddie got the go-home sign from the starter, changing places with the night man, walked down the corridor to the locker room. Taking off the uniform and putting on his street clothes, he yawned a few times. While he was sitting on the bench and tying his shoelaces, he closed his eyes for a long moment, trying to catch a quick nap. His fingers fell away from the shoelaces, and his shoulders drooped. He was in that position when the starter came in. "Tired?" the starter asked. "Just a little." Freddie looked up. "Long day," the starter said. He was always saying that, as though each day was longer than any other. Freddie finished with the shoelaces. He stood up and said, "You got the $1.50? "What $1.50? "The loan," Freddie said. He smiled offhandedly. "From last week. You ran short and needed dinner money, remember?" The starter's face was blank for a moment. He snapped his fingers and nodded emphatically. "You're absolutely right," he declared. "I'm glad you reminded me." He handed Freddie a $1 bill and 2 quarters. Freddie thanked him and said good night and walked out. The starter stood there, lighted a cigarette, and nodded to himself and thinking, "Nice guy." He waited a week before he asked me. Then he asked me so nice. He's really a nice guy. At precisely 8:10, Freddie Lamb climbed out of the bathtub on the 3rd floor of the uptown rooming house in which he lived. In his room, he opened a dresser drawer, took out silk underwear, silk socks, and a silk handkerchief. When he was fully dressed, he wore a pale gray roll-collared shirt that had cost $14, gray silk gabardine suit costing $97.50, dark gray suede shoes that had set him back $23.95. He broke open a fresh pack of cigarettes and slipped them into a wafer-thin sterling silver case. He changed wristwatches. The one he had been wearing was of mediocre quality and had a steel case. The one he wore now was 14-karat white gold. Both kept perfect time. He was very particular about the watches he bought. He wouldn't wear a watch that didn't keep absolutely perfect time. The white gold watch showed 8:20 when Freddie walked out of the rooming house. He walked down 16th to Ontario, then over to Broad and caught a cab. He gave the driver an address downtown. The cab's headlights merged with the flooded glare of southbound traffic. Freddie leaned back and lit a cigarette. "Nice weather," the driver commented. "Yes, it certainly is," Freddie said. "I like it this time of year," the driver said. "Ain't too hot and it ain't too cold. It's just right." He glanced at the rearview mirror and saw that his passenger was putting on a pair of dark glasses. He said, "You in show business?" "No," Freddie said. "What's the glasses for?" Freddie didn't say anything. "What's the glasses for?" the driver asked. "The headlights hurt my eyes," Freddie said. He said it somewhat slowly. His tone indicated that he was rather tired and didn't feel like talking. The driver shrugged and remained quiet for the rest of the ride. He brought the cab to a stop at the corner of 11th and Locust. The fare was $1.20. Freddie gave him $2 and told him to keep the change. As the cab driver drove away, Freddie walked west on Locust to 12th, walked south on 12th, then turned west again, moving through a narrow alley. There were no lights in the alley except for a rectangle of green neon far toward the other end. The rectangle was a glowing frame for the neon wording, "Billy's Hut." It's also a beckoning finger for that special type of citizen He was never happy unless he was being ripped off in a clip joint. They seemed to be flocking through the front entrance on Locust Street. Freddie Lamb, moving toward the back entrance, had checked in his mind that the place was empty now. The dial of his wristwatch showed 8:57. He knew it was too early for customers. He also knew that Billy D'Onofrio was sound asleep on a sofa in the back room, used as a private office. He knew it because he'd been watching D'Onofrio for more than 2 weeks. He was well acquainted with D'Onofrio's nightly habits. When Freddie was 15 yards away from Billy's hut, he reached into his inner jacket pocket and took out a pair of white cotton gloves. He was 5 yards away, came to a stop, and stood motionless, listening. There was the sound of a record player from some upstairs flat on the other side of the alley. From another upstairs flat, there was the noise of lesbian voices saying, "You did, and I didn't, and you did, you did." He listened for other sounds, and there were none. He let the tip of his tongue come out just a little to moisten the center of his lower lip. Then he took a few forward steps that brought him to a section of brick wall, where the bricks were loose. He counted up from the bottom, the light from the green neon showing him the 4th brick, the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th. The 8th brick was the one he wanted. He got a grip on its edges, jutting away from the wall, pulled at it very slowly and carefully. Then he held it in one hand. His other hand reached into the empty space and made contact with the bone handle of a switchblade. It was a 6-inch blade. He planted it there 2 nights ago. He put the brick back in place and walked to the back door of Billy's hut. Bending to the side to see through the window, he caught sight of Billy D'Onofrio on the sofa. Billy was flat on his back, one short leg dangling over the side of the sofa, one arm also dangling, with fat fingers holding the stub of an unlit cigar. Billy was very short and very fat. In his sleep he breathed as though it were a great effort. Billy was almost completely bald, and what hair he had was more white than black. Billy was 53 years old. He would never get to be 54. Freddie Lamb used a skeleton key to open the back door. He did it without a sound. Then, without a sound, he moved toward the sofa. His eyes focused on the crease of flesh between Billy's third shin and Billy's shirt collar. His arm went up and came down, and the blade went into the crease, went in deep to cut the jugular vein, moving left, moving right, to widen the cut so it was almost from ear to ear. Billy opened his eyes and tried to open his mouth. That was as far as he could take it. He tried to breathe, but he couldn't breathe. He heard the voice of Freddie Lamb saying very softly, almost gently, "Good night, Billy." Then he heard Freddie's footsteps moving toward the door opening and the footsteps walking out. Billy didn't hear the door as it closed. By that time, he was far away from hearing anything. On Freddie's wrist, the hands of the white gold watch pointed to 9:26. He stood on the sidewalk near the entrance of a nightclub called Yellow Cat. The place was located in a low-rent area of South Philadelphia. The neighboring structures were mostly tenements and garages and vacant lots heaped with rubbish. The club's exterior complied with the general trend. It was dingy. There was no paint on the wooden walls. But inside it was a different proposition. It was glittering and lavish. The drinks were expensive. The floor show featured a first-rate orchestra and singers and dancers. It also featured a unique type of striptease entertainment, a quintet of young females who took off their clothes while they sat at your table. For a reasonable bonus, they'd let you keep the brassiere or garter or whatnot for a souvenir. The white gold watch showed 9:28. Freddie decided to wait another 2 minutes. His appointment with the owner of Yellow Cat had been arranged for 9:30. He knew that Herman Charm was waiting anxiously for his arrival. But his personal theory of punctuality stipulated split-second precision. Since they'd made it for 9:30, he'd seen Herman at 9:30, not a moment earlier or later. A taxi pulled up and a blonde stepped out. She paid the driver and walked toward Freddie, and he said, "Hello, Pearl." Pearl smiled at him. "Kiss me hello." "Not here," he said. "Later?" He nodded. He looked her up and down. She was 5'5" and weighed 110. Nature had given her a body that caused men's eyes to bulge. Freddie's eyes didn't bulge, though he told himself she was something to see. He always enjoyed looking at her. He wondered if he still enjoyed the nights with her. He'd been sharing the nights with her for the past several months. He reached the point where he wasn't seeing any other women, and maybe he was missing out on something. Just a moment he gazed past Pearl, telling himself that she needed him more than he needed her, and knowing it wouldn't be easy to get off the hook. Well, there wasn't any hurry. Hadn't seen anything else around that interested him, but he wished Pearl would let up on the clinging routine. Maybe he'd really go for her if she wasn't so hungry for him all the time. Pearl stepped closer to him. The hunger showed in her eyes. She said, "Know what I did today? I took a walk in the park." "You did?" "Yes," she said. "I went to Fairmount Park and took a long walk, all by myself." "That's nice," he said. He wondered what she was getting at. She said, "Let's do it together sometime. Let's go for a walk in the park. Something we ain't never done. All we do is drink and listen to jazz and find all sorts of ways to knock ourselves out." He gave her a closer look. This was a former call girl who'd done a stretch for prostitution, a longer stretch for selling cocaine, and had finally decided she'd done enough time and she might as well go legitimate. She'd learned the art of stripping off her clothes before an audience, and now at 26, she was earning good money. It was clean money, as far as the law was concerned. Maybe in her mind it wasn't clean enough. Maybe she was getting funny ideas like this walk in the park routine. Maybe she'd soon be thinking in terms of a cottage for two, a little lawn in the front, and shopping for a baby carriage. He wondered what she'd look like, wearing an apron and standing by the sink and washing dishes. For some reason the thought disturbed him. Couldn't understand why it should disturb him. He heard her saying, "Can we do it, Freddie? Let's do it on Sunday. We'll go to Fairmount Park." "We'll talk about it," he cut in quickly. He glared at his wristwatch. "See you after the show." He hurried through the club entrance, went past the hat check counter, past the tables, and across the dance floor toward a door marked private. There was a button adjoining the door. He pressed the button, one short, two longs, another short, and there was a buzzing sound. He opened the door and walked into the office. It was a large room, and the color motif was yellow and gray. The walls and ceilings were gray, and the thick carpet was pale yellow. The furniture was bright yellow. There was a short, skinny man standing near the desk, and his face was gray. Seated at the desk was a large man, whose face was a mixture of yellow and gray. Freddie closed the door behind him. He walked toward the desk. He nodded to the short, skinny man, and then he looked at the large man and said, "Hello, Herman." Herman glanced at the clock on the desk. He said, "You're right on time." "He's always on time," said the short, skinny man. Herman looked at Freddie Lamb and said, "You do it?" Before Freddie could answer, the short, skinny man said, "Sure he did it." "Shut up, Ziggy," Herman said. He had a soft, sort of gooey voice, as though he spoke with a lot of marshmallow in his mouth. He wore a suit of very soft fabric, thin and fleecy. His thick hands were pressed softly on the desktop. On the little finger of his left hand he wore a large star emerald that radiated soft green light. Everything about him was soft, except for his eyes. His eyes were iron. "You do it?" he repeated softly. Freddie nodded. "Any trouble?" Herman asked. "He never has trouble," Ziggy said. Herman looked at Ziggy. "I told you to shut up." Then very softly, "Come here, Ziggy." Ziggy hesitated. Had a ferret face that always looked sort of worried, now it looked very worried. "Come here," Herman purred. Ziggy approached the large man. Ziggy was blinking and swallowing hard. Herman reached out and slowly took hold of Ziggy's hand. Herman's thick fingers closed tightly on Ziggy's bony fingers and gave a yank. Ziggy moaned. "When I tell you to shut up," Herman said, "you're shut up." He smiled softly and paternally at Ziggy. "Right?" "Right," Ziggy said. Then he moaned again. His fingers were free now, and he looked down at them as an animal gazes sadly at its own crushed paws. He said, "They're all busted." "They're not all busted," Herman said. "They're damaged, just enough to let you know your place. That's one thing you must never forget. Every man who works for me has to know his place." He was still smiling at Ziggy. "Right?" "Right," Ziggy moaned. Then Herman looked at Freddie Lamb and said, "Right?" Freddie didn't say anything. He was looking at Ziggy's fingers. His gaze climbed to Ziggy's face. The lips quivered as though Ziggy was trying to hold back sobs. Freddie remembered the time when nothing could hurt Ziggy, when Ziggy and he were their own bosses and did their engineering on the waterfront. There are a lot of people on the waterfront who are willing to pay good money to have other people placed on stretchers or in caskets. In those days, the rates had been $15 for a broken jaw, $30 for a fractured pelvis, and $100 for the complete job. Ziggy handled the blackjack work and the bullet work. Freddie took care of such special functions as switchblade slicing, lye in the eyes, various powders and pills slapped into a glass of beer or wine or a cup of coffee. Orders for all sorts of jobs in those days. 15 months ago, he was thinking, the times had sure changed. Independent operator was swallowed up by the big combines. It was especially true in this line of business, which followed the theory that competition, no matter how small, was not good for the overall picture. So the moment had come when he and Ziggy had been approached with an offer. They knew they had to accept. There wasn't any choice. If they didn't accept, they'd be erased. Didn't need to be told about that. They just knew. As much as they hated to do it, they had to do it. The proposition was handed to them on a Wednesday afternoon, the same night they went to work for Herman Charn. He heard Herman saying, "I'm talking to you, Freddie." "I hear you," he said. "You sure?" Herman asked softly. "You sure you hear me?" Freddie looked at Herman. He said quietly, "I'm on your payroll. I do what you tell me to do. I've done every job exactly the way you wanted it done. Can I do any more than that?" "Yes," Herman said. His tone was matter-of-fact. He glanced at Ziggy and said, "From here on, it's a private discussion, me and Freddie. Take a walk." Ziggy's mouth opened just a little. He didn't seem to understand the command. He'd always been included in all the business conferences, and now the look in his eyes was a mixture of puzzlement and injury. Herman smiled at Ziggy. He pointed to the door. Ziggy bit hard on his lips and moved toward the door, opened it, and walked out of the room. For some moments it was quiet in the room, and Freddie had a feeling it was too quiet. He sensed that Herman Charn was aiming something at him, something that had nothing to do with the ordinary run of business. There was the creaking sounds of leather as Herman leaned back in the desk chair, folded his big soft fingers around his big soft belly, and said, "Sit down, Freddie. Sit down and make yourself comfortable." Freddie pulled a chair toward the desk. He sat down. He looked at the face of Herman, and for just a moment the face became a wall that moved toward him. He winced. His insides quivered. It was a strange sensation. Never had it before, and he couldn't understand it. But then the moment was gone, and he sat there relaxed, his features expressionless, as he waited for Herman to speak. Herman said, "Want a drink?" Freddie shook his head. "Smoke?" Herman lifted the lid of an enamel cigarette box. "I got my own," Freddie murmured. He reached into his pocket, took out the flat silver case. "Smoke one of mine," Herman said. He paused to signify it wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Then, as though Freddie were a guest rather than an employee, "These smokes are special made, come from Egypt." Freddie took one. Herman flicked a table lighter, applied the flame to Freddie's cigarette, lit one for himself, took a slow, soft drag, let the smoke come out of his nose. Herman waited until all the smoke was out, and then said, "You didn't like what I did to Ziggy?" The flat statements didn't ask for an answer. Freddie sipped his cigarette, not looking at Herman. "You didn't like it," Herman persisted softly. You never like it when I let Ziggy know who's boss." Freddie shrugged. "That's between you and Ziggy." "No," Herman said. He spoke very slowly, with a pause between each word. "It isn't that way at all. I don't do it for Ziggy's benefit. He already knows who's top man around here." Freddie didn't say anything, but he almost winced. Again his insides quivered. Herman leaned forward. "Do you know who the top man is?" "You," Freddie said. Herman smiled. "Thanks, Freddie. Thanks for saying that." And the smile vanished, and Herman's eyes were hammerheads. "I'm not sure you mean it." Freddie took another sip from the Egyptian cigarette. It was strongly flavored tobacco, but somehow he wasn't getting any taste from it. Herman kept leaning forward. "I gotta be sure, Freddie," he said. "You've been working for me over a year. Just like you said, you do all the jobs exactly the way I want them done. You plan them perfect. It's always clean and neat from start to finish. I don't mind saying you're one of the best. I don't think I've ever seen a cooler head. You're as cool as they come. Icicle on wheels." "That's plenty cool," Freddie murmured. "It sure is," Herman said, as the pause drifted in again, his eyes scarcely moving. Maybe it's too cool. Freddie looked at the hammerhead eyes, wondered what showed in his own eyes, wondered what thoughts were burning under the cool surface of his own brain. He heard Herman saying, "I've done a lot of thinking about you, a lot more than you'd ever imagine. You're a puzzler. One thing I always like to do is play stud poker with a puzzler." Freddie smiled dimly. "Want to play stud poker?" "We're playing it now, without cards." Herman gazed down at the desktop. His right hand was on the desktop. He flipped his wrist as though he was turning over the hole card. His voice was very soft as he said, "I want you to break it up with Pearl." Freddie heard himself say, "All right, Herman." It was as though Freddie hadn't spoken. Herman said, "I'm waiting, Freddie." "Waiting for what?" He told the dim smile to stay on his lips. It stayed there. He murmured, "You tell me to give her up, and I say, all right. What more do you want me to say?" "I want you to ask me why. Don't you want to know why?" Freddie didn't reply. He still wore the dim smile, and he was gazing past Herman's head. "Come on, Freddie. I'm waiting to see your hole card." Freddie remained quiet. "All right," Herman said. "I'll keep on showing you mine. I go for Pearl. Went for her the first time I laid eyes on her. Same night I took her home with me, and she stayed over. She did what I wanted her to do, but it didn't mean a thing to her, just like turning a trick. I thought it wouldn't bother me. Once I have them in the bed, I can put them out of my mind. But this thing with Pearl, it's different. I've had her on my mind, and it gets worse all the time. Now it's gotten to the point where I have to do something about it. First thing I got to do is clear the road." "It's cleared," Freddie said. "I'll tell her tonight I'm not seeing her any more." "Just like that?" Herman snapped his fingers. "Yes," Freddie said. His fingers made the same sound. "Just like that." Herman leaned back in the soft leather chair. He looked at the face of Freddie Lamb as though he was trying to solve a cryptogram. Finally, he shook his head slowly, and then he gave a heavy sigh, and he said, "All right, Freddie. That's all for now." Freddie stood up. He started toward the door. Halfway across the room, he stopped and turned and said, "You promised me a bonus for the D'Onofrio job." "This is Monday," Herman said. "I hand out the pay on Friday." "You said I'd be paid right off." "Did I?" Herman smiled softly. "Yes," Freddie said. "You said the deal on D'Onofrio was something special. The customer was paying $1,500. Told me there was $500 in it for me, and I'd get the bonus the same night I did the job." Herman opened a desk drawer and took out a thick roll of bills. "Can I have it in 10s and 20s?" Freddie asked. Herman lifted his eyebrows. "Why the small change?" "I'm an elevator man," Freddie said. "The bank would wonder what I was doing with 50s." "You're right," Herman said. He counted off the 500 in 10s and 20s, handed the money to Freddie. He leaned back in the chair and watched Freddie folding the bills and pocketing them and walking out of the room. The door was closed. Herman said loudly to himself, "Don't try to figure him out. He's all ice and no soul. Strictly a professional." The white gold watch showed 11:35. Freddie sat at a table watching the floor show and drinking from a tall glass of gin and ginger ale. The yellow cat was crowded now, and Freddie wore the dark glasses, and his table was in a darkly shadowed section of the room. He sat there with Ziggy and some other men who worked for Herman. There was Dino, who did his jobs at long range and always used a rifle. There was Shikey, 6'6" and weighing 300 pounds, expert at bone cracking, gouging, and the removal of teeth. There was Riley, another bone cracker and strangling specialist. A tall, pretty boy stood in front of the orchestra, clutching the mic as though it was the only support he had in the world. He sang with an ache in his voice, begging someone to please understand. The audience liked it, and he sang it again. Then 2 black lap dancers came out and worked themselves into a sweat, were gasping for breath as they finished the act. The MC walked on and motioned the orchestra to quiet down, grinned at ringside faces as he said, "Ready for dessert?" "Yeah," a man shouted from ringside. "Let's have the dessert." "All right," the MC said. He cupped his hands to his mouth and called off stage, "Bring it out. We're all starved for that sweetmeat." The orchestra went into medium tempo, the lights changing from glaring yellow to a soft violet. And they came out, 7 girls wearing horn-rimmed glasses and ultra-conservative costumes. They walked primly, and altogether they resembled the stiff-necked females in a cartoon lampooning the WCTU. got a big laugh from the audience. There was some appreciative applause. The young ladies formed a line and slowly waved black parasols as they sang, "Father, oh father, come home with me now." And then it became, "Daddy, oh daddy, come home with me now." And as they emphasized the daddy angle, they broke up the line and discarded the parasols and took off their ankle-length dark blue coats. And their fingers loosened the buttons of dark blue dresses and moved separately toward the ringside tables. The patrons in the back stood up to get a better look. In the balcony, the lenses of 7 lamps were focused on 7 young women getting undressed. Dino, who had a footwear fetish, said loudly, "I'll pay 40 for a high-heeled shoe." One of the girls took off her shoe and flung it toward Freddie's table. Shaki caught it and handed it to Dino. A waiter came over and Dino handed him 4 tens, and he took the money to the girl. Riley looked puzzledly at Dino and said, "What's he going to do with a high-heeled shoe?" And Shaki said, "He boils them and eats them." Ziggy had another theory. "He bangs the heel against his head," Ziggy said. "That's the way he gets his kicks." Dino sat there gazing lovingly at the shoe in his hands, with his other hand caressed the kid-skin surface. And gradually his eyes closed and he murmured, "This is nice. This is so nice." Riley was watching Dino and saying, "I don't get it." Ziggy shrugged philosophically. "Some things," he said, "just can't be understood." "You're so right." It was Freddie talking. Didn't know his lips were making sounds. He was looking across the table at Pearl. She sat with some ring cider, and already she'd taken off considerable clothing. She was half naked. On her face was a detached look, and her eyes moved mechanically as she unbuttoned the buttons and unzipped the zippers. There were 3 men sitting with her, their eyes feasted on her, their mouths open in a sort of mingled fascination and worship. Nearby tables, the other strippers were performing. They weren't getting undivided attention. Most of the men were watching Pearl. One of them offered $100 for a stocking. She took off the stocking and let it dangle from her fingers. In a semi-whisper, she asked if there were any higher bids. Freddie told himself that she wasn't happy doing what she was doing. Again, he could hear her plaintive voice as she asked him to take her for a walk in the park. Suddenly, he knew that he'd like that very much. He wanted to see the sun shining on her hair instead of the nightclub lights. He heard himself saying aloud, "500. He didn't shout it, but the ringside tables, they all heard it. For a moment, there was stunned silence. At his own table, the silence was very thick. He could feel the pressure of it. The moment seemed to have substance, something on the order of iron wheels going round and round, making no sound and getting nowhere. Some things just can't be understood, he thought. He was taking the 10s and 20s from his jacket pocket. The 500 seemed to prove the truth of Ziggy's vague philosophy. Freddie got up from his chair and moved toward an empty table behind some potted ferns adjacent to the orchestra stand. He sat down and placed green money on the yellow tablecloth. He wasn't looking at Pearl as she approached the table. From ringside, an odd voice was saying, "For 1 silk stocking, she gets half $1,000. She seated herself at the table. He shoved the money toward her. He said, "There's your cash. Let's have the stocking." "This a gag?" she asked quietly. Her eyes were somewhat sullen. There was some laughter from the table where Ziggy and some of the others were seated. He now had the notion it was some sort of joke. Freddie said, "Take off the stocking." She looked at the pile of 10s and 20s. She said, "What you want the stocking for?" "Souvenir," he said. It was the tone of his voice that did it. Her face paled. She started to shake her head very slowly as though she couldn't believe him. "Yes," he said. "It's all over, Pearl. It's the end of the line." She went on shaking her head. She couldn't talk. He said, "I'll hang the stocking in my bedroom." She was biting her lip. "It's a long time till Christmas. For some people, it's never Christmas." "Freddie," she leaned toward him, "what's this all about? Why are you doing this?" He shrugged. He didn't say anything. Her eyes were getting wet. "You won't even give me a reason?" All he gave her was a cool smile. His head was turned and he saw the faces at Ziggy's table. He focused on the face of the large man who stood behind the table. He saw the iron in the eyes of Herman Charn. He told himself he was doing what Herman had told him to do. Just then he felt the quiver in his inside. It was mostly in the spine, so his spine was gradually turning to jelly. He spoke to himself without a sound. He said, "No, it isn't that. Can't be that." Pearl was saying, "All right, Freddie, if that's the way it is." He nodded very slowly. Pearl bent over and took the stocking off her leg. She placed the stocking on the table. She picked up the 500, counting it off to make sure it was all there. Then she stood and said, "No charge, mister. I'd rather keep the memories." She put the 10s and 20s on the tablecloth and walked away. Freddie glanced off to the side and saw a soft smile on the face of Herman Charn. The floor show had ended, and Freddie was still sitting there at the table. There was a bottle of bourbon in front of him. Been there for less than 20 minutes, and already it was half empty. There was also a pitcher of ice water, and the pitcher was full. Didn't need a chaser because he couldn't taste the whiskey. He was drinking the whiskey from the water glass. A voice said, "Freddie," and a hand tugged at his arm. He looked up and saw Ziggy sitting beside him. He smiled at Ziggy. He motioned toward the bottle and shot glass and said, "Have a drink." Ziggy shrugged. "Might as well while I got the chance. At the rate you're going, that bottle'll soon be empty." "Very good bourbon," Freddie said. "Yeah?" Ziggy was pouring a glass for himself. He swished the liquor into his mouth and looked closely at Freddie. "You don't care whether it's good or not. You'd be gulping it if it was shoe polish." Freddie was staring at the tablecloth. "Let's go somewhere and drink some shoe polish." Ziggy tugged again at Freddie's arm. He said, "Come out of it." "Come out of what?" "The clouds," Freddie said. "You're in the clouds." "It's nice in the clouds," Freddie said. "Up here having a dandy time. I'm floating." "Floating? You're drowning." Ziggy pulled urgently at his arm to get his hands away from a water glass filled with whiskey. "You're not a drinker, Freddie. What do you want to do, drink yourself into a hospital?" Freddie grinned. He aimed the grin at nothing in particular. For some moments he sat there motionless. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the silk stocking. He showed it to Ziggy and said, "Look what I got." "Yeah," Ziggy said. "I seen her give it to you. What's the score on that routine?" "No score," Freddie said. He went on grinning. "Funny way to end a game. Nothing on the scoreboard. Nothing at all." Ziggy frowned. "You trying to tell me something?" Freddie looked at the glass, at the whiskey in the water glass. He said, "I packed her in." "No," Ziggy said. His tone was incredulous. "Not Pearl. Not that pigeon. It ain't no ordinary merchandise. Wouldn't walk out on Pearl unless you had a very special reason." "It was special, all right." "Tell me about it, Freddie." There was something plaintive in Ziggy's voice, a certain feeling for Freddie that he couldn't put into words. The closest he got to it was, "After all, I'm on your side, ain't I?" "No," Freddie said. The grin was slowly fading. "You're on Herman's side." He gazed past Ziggy's head. "We're all on Herman's side." "Herman? What's he got to do with it?" "Everything," Freddie said. "Herman's the boss, remember?" He looked at the swollen fingers of Ziggy's right hand. "If Herman wants something done, it's got to be done. He gave me orders to break with Pearl. He's the employer and I'm the hired man, so I did what I had to. I carried out his orders." Ziggy was quiet for some moments, then very quietly, "Well, figures he wants her for himself. Don't seem right. Just ain't fair." "Don't make me laugh," Freddie said. "What the hell are we to say what's fair? We're human, aren't we?" "No," Freddie said. He gazed past Ziggy's head. "I don't know what we are. I know one thing. We're not human. We can't afford to be human. Not in this line of business." Ziggy didn't get it. It was a little too deep for him. All he could say was, "You getting funny ideas?" "I'm not reaching for them. They're just coming to me." "Take another drink," Ziggy said. "I'd rather have the laughs." Freddie showed the grin again. "It's really comical, you know, especially this thing with Pearl. I was thinking of calling it quits anyway. You know how it is with me, Ziggy. Never like to be tied down to one skirt. Tonight Pearl said something that it spun me around. We're talking outside the club. She brought it in out of left field. She asked me to take her for a walk in the park." Ziggy blinked a few times. "What?" "A walk in the park," Freddie said. "What for?" Ziggy wanted to know. She's getting square all of a sudden. She want to go around picking flowers? "I don't know," Freddie said. "All she said was, 'It's very nice in Fairmount Park.' She asked me to take her there, and we'd be together in the park, just taking a walk." Ziggy pointed to the glass. "You better take that drink." Freddie reached for the glass. Someone's hand was there first. He saw the thick, soft fingers, the soft green glow of the star emerald. As the glass of whiskey was shoved out of his reach, he looked up and saw the soft smile on the face of Herman Charn. Too much liquor is bad for the kidneys, Herman said. Bent down lower to peer at Freddie's eyes. You look knocked out, Freddie. There's a soft couch in the office. Go in there and lie down for a while. Freddie got up from the chair. He was somewhat unsteady on his feet. Herman took his arm and helped him make it down the aisle, past the tables, to the door of the office. He could feel the pressure of Herman's hand on his arm. It was a very soft pressure. Somehow it felt like a clamp of iron biting into his flesh. Herman opened the office door and guided him toward the couch. He fell onto the couch, sent an idiotic grin toward the ceiling, then closed his eyes and went to sleep. He slept until 4:40 in the morning. The sound that woke him up was a scream. First it was all blurred. There was too much whiskey fog in his brain. He had no idea where he was or what was happening. He pushed his knuckles against his eyes, then sitting up, focused on the faces in the room. He saw Shikey and Riley, and they had girls sitting in their laps. They were on the other couch at the opposite side of the room. He saw Dino standing near the couch with his arm around the waist of a slim brunette. And he glanced toward the door, and he saw Ziggy. It made 7 faces for him to look at. He told himself to keep looking at them. He concentrated on that. Maybe he wouldn't hear the screaming. But he heard it. The scream was an animal sound, and yet he recognized the voice. It came from near the desk, and he turned his head very slowly, telling himself he didn't want to look, but knowing he had to look. He saw Pearl kneeling on the floor. Herman stood behind her. With one hand, he was twisting her arm up high between her shoulder blades. His other hand was on her head. He was pulling her hair so that her face was drawn back, her throat stretched. Herman spoke very softly. You make me very unhappy, Pearl. I don't like to be unhappy. Then Herman gave her arm another upward twist and pulled tighter on her hair, and she screamed again. The girl in Shikey's lap gave Pearl a scornful look and said, You're a damn fool. In spades came from the stripper who nestled against Riley. All he wants her to do is kiss him like she means it. Freddie told himself to get up and walk out of the room. He lifted himself from the couch, took a few steps toward the door, and heard Herman say, Not yet, Freddie. I'll tell you when to go. He went back to the couch and sat down. Herman said, Be sensible, Pearl. Why can't you be sensible? Pearl opened her mouth to scream again. No sound came out. There was too much pain, and it was choking her. The brunette who stood with Dino was saying, It's a waste of time, Herman. She can't give you what she hasn't got. Just don't have it for you, Herman. She'll have it for him, Dino was saying. Before he's finished, he'll have her crawling on her belly. Herman looked at Dino. No, he said, she won't do that. I wouldn't let her do that. He cast a downward glance at Pearl. His lips shaped a soft smile, something tender in the smile and in his voice. Pearl, tell me something. Why don't you want me? He gave her a chance to reply, his fingers slackening the grip on her wrist and her hair. She groaned a few times, then she said, You got my body, Herman. You can have my body any time you want it. That isn't enough, Herman said. I want you all the way, 100%. It's got to be like that, Pearl. You're in me so deep it just can't take any other route. It's got to be you and me from here on in. You got to need me just as much as I need you. But Herman, she gave a dry sob, I can't lie to you. I just don't feel that way. You're going to feel that way. No, Pearl sobbed again. No. Why not? He was pulling her hair again, twisting her arm. It seemed he was suffering more than Pearl. Pain racked his pleading voice. Why can't you feel something for me? Her reply was made without sound. She managed to turn her head just a little toward the couch. Everyone in the room saw her looking at Freddie. Herman's face became very pale. His features tightened and twisted. It seemed he was about to burst into tears. He stared up at the ceiling. Herman shivered. His body shook spasmodically, so he stood on a vibrating platform. Then all at once, the tormented look faded from his eyes. The iron came into his eyes. The soft smile came onto his lips. He released Pearl, turned away from her, went to the desk, opened the cigarette box. It was very quiet in the room, while Herman stood there lighting the cigarette. Took a slow, easy drag, and then he said quietly, All right, Pearl. You can go home now. She started to get up from the floor. The brunette came over and helped her up. I'll call a cab for you, Herman said. He reached for the telephone and put in the call. As he lowered the phone, it was looking at Pearl and saying, "You want to go home alone?" Pearl didn't say anything. Her head was lowered and she was leaning against the shoulder of the brunette. Herman said, "You want Freddie to take you home?" Pearl raised her head just a little and looked at the face of Freddie Lamb. Herman laughed softly. "All right," he said. "Freddie'll take you home." Freddie winced. He sat there staring at the carpet. Herman told the brunette to fix a drink for Pearl. He said, "Take her to the bar and give her anything she wants." Motioned to the other girls, and they got up from the laps of Shaky and Riley. Then all the girls walked out of the room. Herman was quiet for some moments, taking slow drags on the cigarette and looking at the door. Then gradually his head turned and he looked at Freddie. He said, "You're slated, Freddie." Freddie went on staring at the carpet. "You're going to bump her," Herman said. Freddie closed his eyes. "Take her somewhere and bump her and bury her," Herman said. Shaky and Riley looked at each other. Dino had his mouth open and he was staring at Herman. Standing next to the door, Ziggy had his eyes glued to Freddie's face. "She goes," Herman said, and speaking aloud to himself, "She goes because she gives me grief." He had his hand against his chest. "She hits me here where I live. Hits me too hard. Hurts me. I don't appreciate getting hurt, especially here." Then his hand thumped his chest. He said, "You'll do it, Freddie. You'll see to it that I get rid of the hurt." "Let me do it," Ziggy said. Herman shook his head, pointed a finger at Freddie. His finger jabbed empty air, and he said, "Freddie does it. Freddie." Ziggy opened his mouth, tried to close it, couldn't close it, and blurted, "Why take it out on him?" "That's a stupid question," Herman said. "I'm not taking it out on anybody. I'm giving the job to Freddie because I know he's dependable. I can always depend on Freddie." Ziggy made a final frantic try. "Please, Herman, please don't make him do it." Herman didn't bother to reply. All he did was give Ziggy a slow, appraising look up and down. It's like a soundless warning to Ziggy, letting him know he was walking on thin ice, and the ice would crack if he opened his mouth again. Then Herman turned to Freddie and said, "Where's your blade?" "Stashed," Freddie said. He was still staring at the carpet. Herman opened a desk drawer, took out a black-handled switchblade. "Use this," he said, coming toward the couch. He handed the knife to Freddie. "Give it a try," he said. Freddie pressed the button. The blade flicked out, glimmered blue-white. Pushed the blade into the handle and tried the button again. He went on trying the button and watching the flash of the blade. It was quiet in the room as the blade went in and out, in and out. From the street there was the sound of a horn. Herman said, "That's the taxi." Freddie nodded and got up from the sofa and walked out of the room. As he moved toward the girls who stood at the cocktail bar, he could feel the weight of the knife in the inner pocket of his jacket. He was looking at Pearl and saying, "Come on, let's go." As he said it, the blade seemed to come out of the knife and slice into his own flesh. The taxi was cruising north on 16th Street. On Freddie's wrist, the white gold watch said 5:20. He was watching the parade of unlit windows along the dark street. Pearl was saying something, but he didn't hear her. She spoke just a bit louder, and he turned and looked at her. He smiled and murmured, "Sorry, I wasn't listening." "Can you sit closer?" He moved closer to her. A mixture of moonlight and street lamp glow came pouring onto the back seat of the taxi and illuminated her face. He saw something in her eyes that caused him to blink several times. She noticed the way he was blinking and said, "What's the matter?" He didn't answer. He tried to stop blinking and he couldn't stop. "Hangover?" Pearl asked. "No," he said. "I feel all right now. I feel fine." For some moments she didn't say anything. She was rubbing her sore arm. She tried to stretch it, winced and gasped with pain, and said, "Oh, Jesus, it hurts. It really hurts. Maybe it's broken." "Let me feel it," he said. Put his hand on her arm. He ran his fingers down from above her elbow to her wrist. "It isn't broken," he murmured. "Just a little swollen, that's all. Sprained some ligaments." She smiled at him. "The hurt goes away when you touch it." He tried not to look at her, but something fastened his eyes to her face. He kept his hand on her arm. He heard himself saying, "I feel sorry for Herman. If he could see you now, if you'd look at him like you're looking at me." "Freddie," she said. "Freddie." Then she leaned toward him. She rested her head on his shoulder. Then somehow everything was quiet and still. He didn't hear the noise of the taxi's engine. Didn't feel the bumps as the wheels hit the ruts in the cobblestone surface of 16th Street. Suddenly there was a deep rut, and the taxi gave a lurch. He looked up and he heard the driver cursing the city engineers. "God damn it," the driver said. "I've got to deal with tire companies." Freddie stared past the driver's head, his eyes aimed through the windshield to see the wide intersection where 16th Street met the Parkway. The Parkway was a six-lane drive slanting to the left of the downtown area, going away from the concrete of Philadelphia skyscrapers, pointing toward the green of Fairmount Park. "Turn left," Freddie said. They were approaching the intersection, and the driver gave a backward glance. "Left?" the driver asked. "It takes us out of the way. Gave me an address on 17th near Lehigh. We've got to hit it from 16th. "I know," Freddie said quietly, "but turn left anyway." The driver shrugged. "You're the captain." He beat the yellow of a traffic light, and the taxi made a left turn onto the Parkway. Pearl said, "What's this, Freddie? Where are we going?" "In the park." He wasn't looking at her. "We're going to do what you said we should do. We're going to take a walk in the park." "For real?" Her eyes were lit up. She shook her head as though she could scarcely believe what he just said. "We'll take a nice walk," he murmured. "Just the two of us. The way you wanted it." "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, Freddie." The driver shrugged again. The taxi went past the big monument and fountains of Logan Circle, past the Rodin Museum and the Art Museum, and onto River Drive. For a mile or so they stayed on the highway, bordering the moonlit water of the river, and then, without being told, the driver made a turn off the highway, made a series of turns that took them deep into the park. They came to a section where there were no lights, no movement, no sound, except the autumn wind drifting through the trees and bushes and tall grass and flowers. "Stop here," Freddie said. The taxi came to a stop. They got out and he paid the driver. The driver gave him a queer look and said, "You sure picked a lonely spot." Freddie looked at the cabman. He didn't say anything. The driver said, "You're at least 3 miles off the highway. It's going to be a problem getting a ride home." "Is it your problem?" Freddie asked. "Well, no." "Then don't worry about it," Freddie said. He smiled amiably. The driver threw a glance at the blonde, smiled, and told himself that the man might have the right idea after all. With an item like that, any man would want complete privacy. He thought of the bony, buck-toothed woman who waited for him at home, who looked at his face in a distrustful grimace, put the cab in gear, and drove away. "Ain't it nice?" Pearl said. "Ain't it wonderful?" They were walking through a glade where the moonlight showed the autumn colors of fallen leaves. The night air was fragrant with the blended aromas of wildflowers. He had his arm around her shoulders, was leading her toward a narrow lane sloping downward through the trees. She laughed lightly, happily. "It's like as if you know the place. You've been here before?" "No," he said. "Never been here before." There was a tinkling sound of a nearby brook. A bird chirped in the bushes. Another bird sang a tender reply. "Listen," Pearl murmured. "Listen to them." He listened to the singing of the birds. Now he was guiding Pearl down along the slope and seeing the way it leveled at the bottom and went up again on all sides. There's a tiny valley down there with a brook running along the edge. He told himself it would happen when they reached the bottom. He heard Pearl saying, "Wouldn't it be nice if we could stay here?" He looked at her. "Stay here?" "Yeah," she said. "If we'd live here for the rest of our lives. Just be here, away from everything. We'd get lonesome." "No, we wouldn't," she said. "We'd always have company. I'd have you, and you'd have me." They were nearing the bottom of the slope. It was sort of steep now. They had to move slowly. All at once she stumbled and pitched forward. He caught her before she could fall on her face. He steadied her, smiled at her, and said, "Okay?" She nodded. She stood very close to him, gazed into his eyes, and said, "You wouldn't let me fall, would you?" The smile faded. He stared past her. "Not if I could help it." "I know," she said. "You don't have to tell me." He went on staring past her. "Tell you what?" "The situation." "I got it figured, Freddie. So easy to figure." He wanted to close his eyes. He didn't know why he wanted to close his eyes. He heard her saying, "I know why you packed me in tonight. Orders from Herman." "That's right." He said it automatically, as though the mention of the name was the shifting of a gear. "Another thing," she said. "I know why you brought me here." There was a pause, and then, very softly, "Herman." He nodded. She started to cry. It was quiet weeping, contained no fear, no hysteria. It was the weeping of farewell. She was crying because she was sad. Then very slowly she took the few remaining steps, going down to the bottom of the slope. He stood there and watched her face as she turned to look up at him. He walked down to where she stood, smiling at her, trying to pretend his hand was not on the switchblade in his pocket. He tried to make himself believe he wasn't going to do it, but he knew that wasn't true. He'd been slated for this job. The Combine had him listed as a top-rated operator, one of the best in the business. He expected a lot of effort to attain that reputation, to be known as the grade A expert who'd never muffed an assignment. He begged himself to stop. He couldn't stop. The knife was open in his hand. His arm flashed out, went sideways, with the blade sliding in neatly and precisely, cutting the flesh of her throat. She went down very slowly, tried to cough, made a few gurgling sounds, then rolled over on her back and died looking up at him. For a long time he stared at her face. There was no expression on her features now. First he didn't feel anything. Then he realized she was dead and he had killed her. He tried to tell himself there was nothing else he could have done. Even though that was true, it didn't do any good. He took his glance away from her face and looked down at the white gold watch to check the hour and the minute automatically. Somehow the dial was blurred, so the hands were spinning like tiny propellers. He had the weird feeling that the watch was showing time traveling backward. So he found himself checking it in terms of years and decades. He went all the way back, the day when he was 11 years old. They took him to reform school. In reform school, he was taught a lot of things. The thing he learned best was the way to use a knife. The knife became his profession. Somewhere along the line, he caught on to the idea of holding a daytime job to cover his nighttime activities. He worked in stock rooms, and he did some window cleaning and drove a truck for a fruit dealer. Finally, he became an elevator operator. That was the job he liked best. He never realized why he liked it so much, but he realized now. He knew that the elevator was nothing more than a moving cell. The only place for him was a cell. The passengers were just a lot of friendly visitors walking in and out, saying, "Good morning, Freddie. Good night, Freddie." They were such nice people, so the thought of them brought a tender smile to his lips. He realized he was smiling down at her. He sensed a faint glow coming from somewhere, lighting her face. For an instant he had no idea what it was. He realized it came from the sky. It was the first signal of approaching sunrise. The white gold watch showed 5:53. Freddie Lamb told himself to get moving. For some reason he couldn't move. He was looking down at the dead girl. His hand was still clenched about the switchblade. As he tried to relax it, he almost dropped the knife. He looked down at it. The Combine was a cell too, he told himself. The Combine was an elevator from which he could never escape. It was going steadily down, and no stops until the end. There was no way to get out. Herman had made him kill the girl. Herman would make him do other things. There was no getting away from that. If he killed Herman, there would be someone else. The elevator was carrying Freddie steadily downward. Already he had left Pearl somewhere far above him. He realized it all at once. An unreasonable terror filled him. Freddie looked at the white gold watch again. A minute had passed. He knew suddenly that he was slated to do a job on someone in exactly 3 minutes now. Minutes passed, and he stood there alone. At precisely 5:57, he said goodbye to his profession, plunged the blade into his heart.